here,
I'm
Dr.
so
Bird.
We've gotten so much more swanky in our technology since the last time you and I went live on our phones. Like we were like,
It's true. It's true. It's one of the advantages, I think, of the dumb pandemic is everybody now knows how to use Zoom and Facebook Live. It's all great.
I know. It's so fabulous. It's so fabulous. So I am so happy to have you here today to talk to us about the gratefuls and the gratefulness. Would you introduce yourself to my audience and tell people a little bit about you?
You bet. So I'm actually pretty unique. I got a nursing degree actually when I was 19 years old. I was a registered nurse. And then I took a 30-year break and went back to school after I was mostly done raising my family, not completely done, but mostly done. And when I was 49, I went back to school. 2 years later, I got a bachelor's degree. 2 years later, I got a master's degree. 2 years after that, which was this spring, I finished my coursework for a PhD in political science, focusing on public administration and international relations. But in that 30-year span, my husband and I ended up raising 25 children. So it's a really big number and we were really serious, right? But I had, during that time, and this was pre-internet days, and the ability to find a tribe that I felt like I could belong to was pretty limited. And I found myself as a mom going into burnout, and nobody talked about parental burnout. In fact, there's still not a lot of people talking about parental burnout, but it was very real. And I had this nursing background. They had started talking about burnout for nursing professions, social workers, first responders, but it was really profession driven. So the answer was things like, well, take time off, right? Or, don't work nights and weekends, or take an extended sabbatical. Well, you can't do that when you're a parent, right? And so I actually had to start my own journey and figure out what was going to work for me. And there was a lot of trial and error. And at the time I was not, doing a lot of research. I have done that since then and have found lots of research backing up what I ended up stumbling on. But the practice of gratitude was one of the things that I kind of came upon and started doing that. And at the beginning, look, I'm telling you, there were some days where it was so hard for me to find anything to be grateful for. If it was summer, I was grateful for air conditioning and, blue sky. I mean, it was hard sometimes to find things to be grateful for. And as I've continued that over the years, it's become a lot easier to see sometimes blessings from adversity, and not always even in it. But knowing that there's a way through the hard times, they come upon all of us, right? So my husband and I have buried 6 of our girls, which is super sad. All of the girls had disabilities, but it doesn't make it any better, right? When you go through the grief process. And so knowing that I was going to be able to come out of this really deep, dark place was helpful, but I knew that gratitude was part of that. And let me just give you kind of a really poignant example. So in 2005, our daughter was 17 years old and she passed away about 2 weeks before Christmas. So she was born severely disabled and she had far outlived her life expectancy. So at some point we knew she was going to pass away. We just didn't really know when that was going to happen. And it happened right after she turned 17. And so it was a really difficult time, but I also had already scheduled my first international humanitarian trip and I had paid for it, and we don't have a lot of extra money. And so I didn't feel like I could cancel. They were all non-refundable. And so my 19-year-old son at the time and I went on this trip to Kenya, and we went to serve people in a developing country in circumstances like we mostly don't encounter in the United States, right? And what I found was, as I stayed busy serving others and being grateful for what I did have in the States, like flushing toilets and running water, and we can turn on the tap and it's clean. I found that as I came through that service experience and I got back to the United States, I had actually worked through the bulk of the grief. And that was really insightful and kind of amazing to me, because I didn't know.
So profound.
Yeah, I didn't know that it could be that powerful, but it really can be that powerful, right? And I know that I've added in some other things too, mindfulness and meditation, and journaling, and then of course mindset, right? Knowing that the hard times aren't going to last. The good times don't either, actually. So this practice of gratitude, right, it has become part of my life. And then as I became more of a social science researcher, what I have found is that there is a lot of research that backs up this, the effects that gratitude can have on us. In fact, there's research that shows that it changes the chemicals in our brain. It releases oxytocin and some other feel-good hormones, where it really can make us feel better the more grateful that we are. So there's research that shows that that's kind of my experience.
I love this so much for so many reasons. One is that I remember when you lost your daughter. I remember that. And it reminds me to think about how long you and I have known each other, because we met right around that time, I think. And for those of you that are watching, Holly and I used to be lobbyists up on the Hill, and activists and advocates on the Hill. I was on the Planned Parenthood side of things, and Holly I was told by many people to watch out for you, because we wouldn't have anything in common.
That's so funny.
We have a midwifery practice and all of these things, right? And you and I connected so much on that level about birth and childbirth and
the ability to choose where you have your baby.
Where you have your baby and how you have your baby. And it reminds me about my own gratefulness practice, and being grateful for the people that we connect with in the world, even when people say we're not supposed to be friends because we come from different political backgrounds, right? And I think that just hearing you talk about your own gratefulness practice is really lovely. So you wrote an article or a piece that posted, and that's really why I was like, you have to come on and interview with me. Could you highlight, and I'd love to include it in the comments as a link, and so if you could send it to me or comment, link it later.
Okay.
What are the highlights from this piece about gratitude that you wrote about that got people to think a little bit differently about gratitude?
Well, I think some of us think that that it all gets wrapped up in, self-care. And we have these things where we say, okay, I'm going to do that. That's kind of a hot topic, right? We're going to do self-care. And it's, right. And actually you've told me soul care, which I actually think is really descriptive. And I think it's perfectly appropriate, because I actually subdivided that into surface self-care and deep self-care. And the surface self-care is the stuff, it's like eating a donut, right? It may satisfy you temporarily. It may get you through, finals and, staying up all night writing a school paper, even when you're 55, whatever, but it doesn't give you that long lasting stuff. And gratitude is one of the things that does that. And I think sometimes people think, well, as long as I can check a list, right? Okay, well, I'm grateful for this, and I'm grateful that my kids have shoes, and okay, I'm done. But what really happens is, as you start to do this practice, and everybody does it a little bit differently, but there's a lot of, I think, science behind actually writing it down. So writing a list, making a list, and doing it daily, and the more precise you can get, the better it's going to be actually for that soul care for yourself, right? So for me, saying I'm grateful for air conditioning, that's pretty broad, right? But when I can say things like, I'm really grateful that in the hot weather, I can open the door to my house and it is welcoming because it's cool and it's refreshing, right? I mean, that's something that's a little more precise, and it helps. And I think one of the reasons that people talk about doing a gratitude practice at the beginning of the day is because it helps you set your brain, right? And with that, with those endorphins and those hormones that help you feel good, it actually changes how you view things. So you start to view people in a better light. You start to become more optimistic. You start to believe that people have better intentions, even if their actions are not any different. Nothing changes except for you. And so it's this lens, I think, that really lends itself to seeing the world in a better light. And Again, I just think it's a really powerful practice. And some people are just like, yeah, it's poo-poo, we're grateful in November. And you'll see it on social media. You do a month of gratitude. Day 1, I'm grateful for, my whatever.
family.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I'm grateful for my family, which I am, right? But when you get into those things and you can be really precise about it, that's helpful. And then the other thing that's helpful is when you get into those troughs in life that really can be difficult, you can go back to things that you've written before and you can kind of see how your life has not been so bad, right? How you have been blessed, how things have worked out, how even in times of trial, maybe you've had friends who stood by you, or you had somebody who sent you a card or sent you a text or something, right? I mean, I have a friend who's going through a hard time right now. And I randomly just sent her a hey, I'm thinking about you text. Like there wasn't a full conversation. And she goes, oh, that's so sweet. And I'm like, and I sent her a little heart, right? And it was about a week later, she sent me another text and she said, I just want you to know that I was in a really bad place that day and feeling really abandoned and really alone. And your text came through and it was at the perfect time, right? And I think it's things like that where you can say, oh my gosh, I'm really grateful for a friend who thought about me during this time and checked in. Right. Yeah. Those types of things.
I just had that happen with a friend of mine myself. It's really when you get that little nudge.
Yeah.
Like, hey, text this person randomly out of nowhere. There's a reason behind the nudge, right?
Yeah. So not only can you be grateful that you got the nudge, but you can be grateful that you received from someone else, right? And if you write those things down, then that becomes a record that you can look back on and that you can share. Because so many times, I mean, something like that, usually in 5 years or whatever, you're not going to remember that somebody remembered to text you out of the blue, right? But you can see a pattern when you start recording these things.
Yeah. Do you have what you would consider a regular gratefulness practice? Like, so I write down what I'm grateful for every day in like this series of questions that I do. And I have a practice that Mary Houston, who I interviewed earlier for this series, taught me. But do you have a regular practice? And if so, what is it?
I do, but I fall off the wagon regularly also, which is why they call it a practice, I guess. Yeah, I do. And it's because I incorporate it with my journaling. So I do a regular journaling practice. That is something that I think is also super powerful. I'm a writer, but there's also some pretty good research, especially from Dr. James Pennebaker. He has written about using journaling through healing, even through trauma, right? So there's some pretty good stuff there. So I'm a pretty consistent journaler, and I will use my journaling time to write down these things, and I just make a list, right? I just make a list, so numbered.
Awesome. That's wonderful. I love that you said you fall off the wagon sometimes because it's a practice. And this is what I keep trying to teach my clients and people who work with me. I'm like, it's practice. It's like soccer practice and basketball practice and a yoga practice. It's a practice. You practice.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be perfect. So you've talked a little bit about why being grateful is something you consider to be important. But are there some highlights from, like, say, the last couple of years where you really recognize that being grateful was important because something happened as a result?
That's a really good question. I think the last couple of years, I went through some really difficult times personally in my relationship, one of my relationships that was really meaningful to me. And there was a lot of betrayal, which kind of caught me by surprise. And I think even heading into that, as traumatic as that was, because I had a gratitude practice and because I had a journaling practice, I always believed that I would come out okay, right? And I think that was something I went in with. I didn't know if our relationship would survive, to be honest, but I did believe that I was going to be okay because I knew that I had so many things, where God or the universe, whatever you want to look at it, has blessed me. And I believe going into it that God had my back and that I would be able to come out of it. And so I think that that's one thing. And I've come out of that, the trauma of it at least. And I'm grateful already. I'm already grateful for the lessons that I learned. And I told some of my friends that level of betrayal really broke me. But as I put myself back together, it's a really interesting paradox because I'm both stronger and I'm also more tender. So I cry a lot more.
Yay!
You know, but I'm also, I also gained incredible empathy, right? Because it was one of those, I can't believe this is happening to me. And then it's like, oh, this happens to a lot of my friends. And I was not as, like, I've always tried to be empathetic, but I just didn't have as much understanding as I gained through my own experience. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's kind of what you're looking for, but yeah, I mean, I went into it knowing I would come out of it, even though it was super painful.
Well, and I think that's how your life changes when you focus on gratitude, right? When I was going through my divorce, my epic divorce back in 2010,
Yeah.
The very first thing someone said to me was, "Well, what are you grateful for?" And I was like, "Not a goddamn thing, motherfucker!" Like I was like, I was so damn mad.
Yeah.
At her for leaving. Like I was so angry, but there were moments every day, even in that God-wrenching grief, that I was grateful that I still had a place to sleep, that I was grateful that I had my dogs, that I had my friends. Like all of a sudden, all of the love that I had been building throughout my life just came right in to hold me in that just terrible time.
Yeah.
And I think that you just hitting on that is so important, that when you have a practice of gratitude and you can focus on what you're grateful for. About a year and a half later, the thing I was the most grateful for was that she left and that she asked for a divorce. And I was like, because it was the greatest gift that she ever gave me in all that time we were together. And it was that moment when I realized what I could really be grateful for was the thing that almost tore me apart and almost wrecked me, right? And so I think that in those moments, that's how your life changes when you're focused on gratitude. You can go through the most terrible trauma and still know, like you said, you were being held by God and you knew you were going to be okay, even through all of that.
Yeah. And I think for me, having had it as a practice, it helps fill the well, right? So when you go through that deep stuff, it feels like the well is just totally depleted. But because you had put stuff in before you got there, right? I mean, I think that made it a little easier. But even the first times when I didn't have a practice of gratitude, right? Once I was able to start to heal from in fact, the first daughter that passed away was 25 years ago this month. And that's a long time, but it totally took us by surprise. She was a little girl with Down syndrome. She was doing fine, we thought, and then she had a choking incident with a babysitter, and she passed away. And I was just like beside myself. I did not know how to survive that at all. But like everybody who's thrust into that situation, you start to figure it out. And then, okay, well, in the good times, it's like the rainy day fund, right? In the good times, you put stuff in for that rainy day because you're going to have to draw on that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I am really grateful for is a tribe of women that has my back. And we go back and forth between who needs the support more at one time or another, right? And I think that's the beauty of having those types of relationships as well.
I love that idea that you're putting stuff in for the rainy day, because it's not like our life is going to be perfect every single day, and it's not going to be all rosy and beautiful. I mean,
guarantee it's not going to be.
Navigating intimate relationships and friendships and children,
and then you throw in pandemic, and you throw in, Utah had an earthquake, and and we have racial unrest and riots, and
yeah, we're battling all of this, like really.
And there's murder hornets.
And there's murder hornets, and we're dealing with anti-racist stuff, and we're dealing with pandemic, and we're dealing with all of these things that are going to keep going, by the way. Like this is not going to end anytime soon. Yep. And so
Agree.
I love this idea of filling your well and putting stuff in for when it really hits the fan.
Yeah.
So how imperfect is your practice of gratitude? Like you alluded to it, but how imperfect is it?
So my goal is daily, but it doesn't happen all that often. In fact, the reality is when I am happier and feel like things are going better, I do it less.
Yep.
So then I have to go back to it, right? Then I have to reset. So I do try to, I was trying to journal every day. I still am trying, but it's more like once a week. And
Yeah.
so then it's a weekly practice instead of a daily practice. But I know that it's there. It's on my list. I beat myself up a lot, which I shouldn't, but but I just keep going, right? And I'm just like, I think one of the things that I learned about journaling is start where you are, right? Because I felt like I would have these long stretches of time where I didn't journal, and then I would journal, and it was like, okay, now I have to catch up on the last 6 months, right? And for some reason, there was a book I read, and he gave us permission, which who knows, why did I need permission? But he gave us permission to start where you were, not go back, and limit it. Give it 15 minutes a day. If you can only do 15 minutes a day, then great, right? And that really was the beginning of a very consistent practice. And so I really have done a lot of journaling, and that's probably been 7 years, I think. So super, super consistent. I've always been a journaler, but I was not do anything for 6 months and then vomit everything on the page for 20 pages worth, and then not go back for 6 months, right?
Well, yeah, because you're exhausted and
I know.
regurgitated the last.
I know.
And someone just commented, "Thank you for reminding us it can be imperfect," because really, this is where the rubber meets the road, I think,
Yeah.
Holly, is this idea that I love what you said about starting where you are, because we could spend, and we have been trained as women that if we don't engage in perfect action that's going to improve everybody's lives, that somehow we are failing. And so you just gave the perfect example of vomiting up your last 6 months of your life and then being like, screw that, I'm not touching that again.
I know, right?
Wonder.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think, and here's the thing is I don't actually beat myself up that much, because I know that it's something that I want to be working towards.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, oh my gosh, I missed a day, I missed 2 days, I missed 3 days, I'm going to screw it. No, it's just like, okay, well, I missed those 3 days, and I'm going to get back in, and I'm going to do it again. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do it again. And I find for me, it doesn't always work for everybody, but I find for me, if I do it first thing in the morning, it's much more likely to get done. If I wait until the end of the day to recap, it doesn't usually get done, right? It doesn't happen for me usually. So for me, first thing in the morning works. That is prime time actually for my brain. I'm a morning person. Like I'm a morning person and a night owl both, but because I don't need a ton of sleep. But I know in the mid-afternoon to evening, I'm not as productive. I'm not as creative. I'm not as, able to focus. And it's fine. Everybody has their own rhythm. So I typically get up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning. I have to get kids up at 6 that have a hard time waking themselves up, and then take them to work. And so that gives me a half an hour of quiet time before people get up, and I'll, get up, get dressed, make myself a cup of hot tea, whatever, and journal for even 15 minutes. And then if I have time to come back to it, great. And if I don't, it's okay, because I've got something down.
I love what you just said about knowing your rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
That is gold, y'all. Know your rhythm and stop fighting against your damn rhythm.
Yeah.
Because we all have this rhythm.
Yeah.
And we have been trained to not listen to the rhythm, right? Yeah. Like, this with mamas in particular, right? When you're birthing babies, they got to listen to their own rhythm of their body, right? And so I love that this is such a great idea. And because when I was beating myself up a little bit for not practicing my gratefuls. And then I was sitting, Jim and I have a routine where we sit and have coffee together, but we're both just kind of waking up, and we sit in this little seating area in our bedroom with a table between us and our coffee. And I realized I was playing Candy Crush for the whole time we were sitting there. And I was like, I could totally be writing what I'm grateful for right now. Like, I could get back into my practice of doing a daily journal entry, like journaling and writing and praying, because that's when I write all my prayers.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what am I doing? So I play Candy Crush for a minute while I'm coming in. And then I'm like, and then it hits, and I'm like, woo, there's the download, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I love that, listening to your rhythm. That is gold, y'all. If you get nothing else from this, just take that right now and run with it. So my last question for you, love, is what is one tool you can share with people that will help them recognize what to be grateful for? Earlier on, you and I were talking about, being grateful for the air conditioning and the blue sky, but like, what is one tool you can share that will help people recognize what to be grateful for when they're like, I got nothing?
Well, I think there's tools. I don't usually use anything but just a regular journal, but there are gratitude journals, of course. And they will have, like, I'm not sure what questions you ask yourself, but there's questions like, what am I grateful for today that I can smell? What am I grateful for today that I can touch? There's journaling prompts, and I've even created a couple of things on my website, which is not very active. I don't do a whole lot there, but you know, you can go search for journaling prompts, even how to know yourself or gratitude journaling prompts. You know, it's super easy in November to find them. It's not as easy in June or in July necessarily, right? And I think the thing that happens, and maybe sometimes women who are moms beat themselves up because kids take time. They take so much time, right? They expand to fill all the time you give them and then some more. And I think maybe the best tool is to give yourself some grace. So whatever it is that works for you, right? That's the key, really. So if you're a person that works well with a reminder on your Google Calendar, then set a reminder on your Google Calendar. If you're somebody who needs a physical book in your hand to open it up and you fill it out, like there are journals that I've seen that are 5-year journals. You do 1 sentence per day for 5 years. That will not work for me. I write way more than that, right? But for somebody who's like, oh my gosh, I just want to get started. There are several online journaling apps that really ask you for one thing that you're grateful for in the morning and one thing you're grateful for at night. So that's not really answering your question, because what I'm telling you is to just find what works for you and do it trial and error, right? There's lots of things to try.
But I think it does answer our question. Like this, that is a great tool to listen, have grace and listen to yourself and do what works for you, because what's going to work for you is not going to be the same thing that's going to work for everybody else. And I think that's one of the really big keys to engaging in a practice of gratitude is recognizing that not everybody's going to speak or act or think like you do. Yeah. And we can be grateful for that, because I don't want to live in a world where everybody says the same thing or thinks the same thing as me. That's just not a world I want to be in.
Yeah. You know, I had one additional thought. So we've talked about writing, but there are people who want to type it, which is great. There are people who might speak it into a voice recorder, which is also great. There are people who might want to capture it and post it on Instagram, right? So you can do gratitude journaling on Instagram. And that's okay too, right? It's all, again, going back to your style and what works for you. And I'm a writer. I process through writing. It's super, super helpful to me. And so that's what I choose. But yeah, there's lots of ways.
Oh, Anastasia says a practice of gratitude. It's so good. I think this idea that we have really talked about practicing gratitude, I think is really, it's resonating. So yay. Thank you so much for joining me, Holly. Hang tight, okay?
Oh, you are my friend. I will do it anytime. So you're very welcome.
Thank you all for joining us today. If you don't know, I've got a free book on my website at naturalbornrebel.com. You should download it and start the journal prompts, because you can write down what you're grateful for today.
You should download it.